Charles Dickens' masterpiece, A Tale of Two Cities, contains one of the most famous opening lines in all of literature. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But what was Dickens' intent or purpose in writing not only that line, but the whole novel itself? Welcome to this video about author intent and purpose. An author writes with a purpose, whether it's to persuade, inform, or entertain. Let's take a look. Do you like pie? I do. It doesn't matter what kind of pie you like, as long as you remember the 3 letters that make up pie. Because that's how you can remember the intent and purpose categories authors use most. The P stands for persuade, the I stands for inform, and the E stands for entertain. See? It's easy as pie. Now, let's take a closer look at the technique writers use to persuade, inform, and entertain. Now, it may seem really easy to determine whether the author means to persuade, inform, or entertain, but in some cases, it isn't. First, let's remember that writing encompasses a number of different fields. There are book authors, as we've noted. There are reporters who write for daily newspapers. Advertising and marketing representatives write on behalf of clients. In all cases, they're writing with an intent in mind. Let's start with persuasion. Persuasion nowadays takes a number of different forms. Companies use advertising and marketing to persuade the audience that their product is the best. Digital media platforms, in some cases, have a specific point of view and want to persuade their audience that they're right. Book authors work in the art of persuasion. Any number of diet books on the market seek to persuade you that their plan will work for you. One of the most popular books of all time relies on persuasion. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People tries to persuade you that you too can become more popular. Then there's inform. News reporters have been informing the public for centuries on the important news of the day, but novelists also inform. They inform by recounting important historical events or analyzing data and presenting evidence to back up the claims. Let's take a look at a few books that aim to inform. The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, explains in an informative way how the endless choices we have contribute to anxiety and depression. Any cookbook like The Joy of Cooking informs us how to use ingredients to make certain foods. And Flags of Our Fathers informs us about the story behind the most famous war photo in American history, the 6 men who raised the American flag at Iwo Jima. Lastly, we use writing to entertain. Entertain can have a number of different meanings. Look at it this way. If the writing has elicited an emotional response, you've probably been entertained. The famous newspaper columnist Dave Barry and the editorial cartoonist Mike Peters each entertain with dry humor. The humorist Will Rogers entertained with his wry observations that included, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. The classic To Kill a Mockingbird even entertains because it explores the injustices that happened during a time in American history. Persuade, inform, entertain. Remember, it's as easy as eating pie.
Let's talk about supporting details and how they can help strengthen your writing. A paragraph usually starts with the main idea, also called the topic sentence, and the rest of the paragraph gives specific details to support and develop that point. Today, we'll be talking about those details called supporting details. Think of it this way. If you're building a table, then you need a flat surface for the tabletop. This is like your main point or topic sentence. If that flat surface doesn't have any legs to stand on, though, it's no good as a table. The supporting details are like the legs of the table, propping up the topic sentence. There are 6 main types of supporting details: descriptions, vocabulary, proof, voices, explanation, and importance. Description is fairly self-explanatory. The writer can use the 5 senses, comparison, and metaphors to help paint a vivid picture for the reader. Vocabulary helps with clarification. For example, if you have a topic sentence that relies on the word pulchritudinous, It might help to include a definition of the word so the reader doesn't get sidetracked. Pulchritudinous means beautiful, by the way. Proof is often made up of facts, statistics, and dates that are hard evidence for your main point, and voices are expert quotes, individual opinions, or different perspectives that can be considered soft proof. Explanation is restating the main point more simply, and importance is answering the question, so what, after a fact or a quote. Let's take a look at a quick example. Being a celebrity is often difficult. First of all, celebrities have to look flawless all the time. Perez Hilton once said celebrities have to sacrifice their private lives when they choose to enter the spotlight. Think about the gossip rags you've seen with unflattering paparazzi photos of the private moments of the stars' lives. This obsession can sometimes lead to stalking, threatening letters, and even physical attacks. Okay, so our main point is that first sentence. Being a celebrity is difficult. The supporting details follow. You can see a voice is presented, that of Perez Hilton, a descriptive explanation directing you to think about the paparazzi photos, and two simply descriptive phrases. This paragraph would be even stronger with a testimonial about a real-life story of a celebrity facing danger because of their place in the public image. That would be a proof-based supporting detail. When you're writing supporting details, it's important not to stray too far from your original point. Remember, every paragraph in a written work is pointing back in some way to your overall thesis, and every sentence in the paragraph is pointing to the main point of that paragraph. If you have a main point about, say, how dogs are man's best friend, you wouldn't want to use an example of how disloyal cats are in that paragraph. Save that point for another paragraph. Stay focused on facts about dogs in the supporting paragraph about dogs. If you get off track from your main point, your reader might get confused and lose interest. A common mistake in writing a paper is not providing enough specific details. The more specific, the better. A vague detail is like a thin table leg. It will make your entire point wobbly. Often, vague details come when you're pressed for time or don't want to research a topic fully. Take the time to make your paper worth reading. Let's look at an example to further prove this point. You could write something like this. I felt like I was sick. By the time I got home, it was worse. The symptoms kept developing, one after the other. Okay, you know in general what's happening, but think how much more convincing the following sentence would be. I was sick at my desk when I felt the tickle in my throat and started to cough. By the time I got home, the room seemed to be swimming around me, and I found I had a fever of 102. I crawled into bed, shivering. That's a little more vivid, isn't it? The details are strong and vibrant, not generic and vague. It makes the writer's point much more clearly. So let's look back on what we've learned. Supporting details help hold up your main point. They should be specific, creative, and focused on the main point of the paragraph. Do this, and your writing will greatly improve.
Hi, and welcome to this video on predictions. As we are reading a story, whether we realize it or not, we are making predictions. This is particularly the case when we are reading actively instead of passively. Reading actively means that we are engaged with the text fully and immersed in its world. Our thinking about that fictional world allows us to come up with possible outcomes, meaning we use textual evidence to make predictions. Today we'll be looking at two types of predictions and how to best make predictions while you're reading. Let's get started. So like I said, we'll be looking at two basic kinds of predictions. Predictions based on our knowledge of how literature works, and predictions based on information the text has already given us. The first type uses a slightly different way of looking at literature than the second. Though there is a lot of literature out there, there are often ideas or basic tropes that remain constant, or at least common, throughout most works. For instance, we understand how protagonists work and how they deal with conflict. We also know about the basic structure of plots in novels and stories. What are some of the implications of this in terms of making predictions? Number one, answers are rarely given at the beginning of a story. Number 2, looking at where you are in a story or book will give you a good idea as to how soon the climax will occur. Number 3, literature tends to influence other literature. Think of how many works have similar endings, character developments, etc. Number 4, think of genres and how their conventions differ. Mystery novels, Shakespearean comedies, and science fiction works all have different general rules. These 4 basic principles allow us to make predictions simply by understanding the basic structure and conventions of different kinds of literature. For example, after reading 1 or 2 Jane Austen novels, you will likely be able to predict how future works by Austen will end. You can go further and apply this to romance novels in general, as they have been deeply influenced by the rules and conventions created by Austen. Now let's look at our other type of prediction making, predicting based on information in the text. One of the tools many authors use in their writing, which is helpful when making predictions, is foreshadowing. Defined simply, foreshadowing is a literary device used by authors that hints at developments occurring later on in the story. Some forms of foreshadowing are more direct. They are obvious or ironic statements that let readers know what is likely to happen. However, sometimes the author may use subtle foreshadowing, which usually consists of clues that don't become apparent until after the foreshadowed event comes to pass. In this case, you can look at an event in the text and think back to what previously happened and almost say, I should have seen it coming. Let's look at an example of direct foreshadowing. Lauren Oliver's Before I Fall contains a clear example of direct foreshadowing in the very first sentence of the book, as the narrator states, "They say that just before you die, your whole life flashes before your eyes, but that's not how it happened for me." Here we know from context that the narrator must be dead. However, we know that the narrator's life did not pass before her eyes, as it's known to happen. Therefore, the phrase, "That's not how it happened to me," makes readers ask, well, how did it happen to you? This kind of direct foreshadowing works to make readers want to continue reading in order to find an answer to the question posed. You can make predictions by thinking outside the box here, as the information suggests that the narrator will not experience a normal death. Another example occurs in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. In Chapter 7, Bilbo and his band of dwarves enter Mirkwood Forest and are warned several times about straying from the main path by the character Beorn. The final warning is written as such: "Be good, take care of yourselves, and don't leave the path." First, the fact that this is mentioned several times before Beorn's final warning makes it pretty obvious foreshadowing. And the fact that Beorn's final warning is in all caps drives home the point. We can infer from all of this that there is danger if Bilbo and company stray from the path, and perhaps more importantly, that they will in fact stray from the path. We can reasonably conclude this because otherwise discussing the path so often would be a waste of space. For an example of subtle foreshadowing, let's look at Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. "Tut, man, one fire burns out, another's burning. One pain is lessened by another's anguish. Turn giddy and be helped by backward turning. One desperate grief cures with another's languish. Take thou some new infection to thy eye, and the rank poison of the old will die." In this dialogue, Benvolio is advising Romeo, who is in love with Rosaline at this point, to fall in love with another in order to cure himself of his infatuation. There are a few things going on here. First, we see Romeo deeply in love with Rosaline. In this way, his future mad love for Juliet is foreshadowed in a subtle manner. But even more subtle here is the reference to rank poison. The rank poison of his love for Rosaline does in fact pass once he meets and falls in love with Juliet. But it is this love that ultimately leads him to literally die by poisoning himself. Unlike the previous examples of direct foreshadowing, it would be difficult for readers to piece this together until after reading the play. Then in future readings, or just by thinking back to this dialogue after a first reading, these lines become all the more powerful. In terms of making predictions, it is often much easier to focus on direct foreshadowing. Let's take a look at some useful aspects for understanding foreshadowing and making predictions. First, be on the lookout for what's known as Chekhov's gun. A Russian writer, Anton Chekhov, insisted on getting rid of all unnecessary elements in his works, so as to leave nothing hanging or unexplained at the end. He said, "If in the first act you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, don't put it there." Though this is not always true, you will find that many writers follow this rule. You can actually see this used in the previous example from The Hobbit. Warning Bilbo to avoid straying from the path would be an unneeded thing to repeat and emphasize if he weren't going to eventually leave the path. Then again, there's also the red herring. A red herring is a literary device that misleads the reader. It is essentially a dead end. Red herrings are often used in mystery novels in order to build suspense and hold off on revealing the actual suspect too early. Secondly, be mindful of genre. Different genres have different rules and conventions. For instance, we know from reading mystery novels or watching Law and Order that the obvious suspect is rarely the correct one. Therefore, we can make predictions about the actual culprit based on this knowledge. Works of science fiction, similarly, often include plot twists. Things aren't quite what they seem until we read further. Therefore, being suspicious of the obvious is one means of making predictions, or at least one way to avoid making incorrect predictions. This is where using other works to make predictions comes into the picture. We can make predictions by thinking about how other works in a particular genre have functioned. The more mystery novels you read, the better you will become at predicting the culprit. The more Shakespearean tragedies you read, the easier it will be for you to make thoughtful predictions about the ending. Though not all events in a text can be effectively predicted, foreshadowing often offers a way for readers to logically piece together a story's outcome. Reading carefully and looking for possible instances of foreshadowing is one strategy for making these sorts of informed predictions. Now, before we go, here's a review question to test your knowledge. Which of the following is an example of a red herring? A suspect initially thought to be the murderer ends up being innocent. B, a warning from a psychic comes true. C, a character enters a place that he is warned about and faces conflict. Or D, Katniss takes Primrose's place in the Hunger Games. The correct answer is A.
You need help studying, so you came to Mometrics Academy. As a result, you learn more and succeed in your studies. Hello and welcome to this lesson on cause and effect. Cause and effect relationships are everywhere throughout stories. Cause is why something happened, and effect is what actually happened. There are usually subtle words or phrases that indicate whether something is the cause or effect in a sentence. The best way to learn this topic is to practice, and practice some examples. And while we're practicing, I'll highlight some of those key words. Tim fell asleep because he was tired. Cause, because he was tired. Effect, Tim fell asleep. Keywords, because. The word because is used to introduce a cause in a story. This sentence is probably written inverted from how you might usually see the word because used in a cause and effect example. You might also see the sentence written in this order. Because he was tired, Tim fell asleep. Let's check out a different example. Since I was thirsty, I drank a bottle of water. As a result, the bottle is empty. Cause. Since I was thirsty. Effect, I drank a bottle of water. Cause 2. I drank a bottle of water. Effect 2. As a result, the bottle is empty. Keywords. Since, as a result. In this example, there are 2 causes and 2 effects. There are also 2 keywords. The word since is used to indicate a cause, just like the word because in the previous example. The first sentence follows the same sentence structure as our previous example once we inverted it. It begins with the key word and the cause follows after. The phrase as a result is used to indicate an effect in a sentence. This sentence also follows similar sentence structure. However, instead of introducing a cause in the sentence, it is introducing an effect. Here's a list of other keywords to be aware of when identifying causes and effects in stories. Cause: if, maybe, due to, because, and since. Effect: then, consequently, as a result, for this reason, and so. When identifying cause and effect in the stories you're reading, just remember to slow down, examine the sentence, and look for key words. That's not to say that there will always be keywords to give it away. However, you can still find the cause and effect by asking what happened and why it happened.
Separating fact from opinion can be a difficult task. In this video, we will discuss the distinction between fact and opinion and offer some helpful tips for distinguishing between the two. A fact is a statement that can be proven to be true by the use of evidence. Factual statements are true in all cases and for all people. In other words, facts are universal. Some examples include: dogs are mammals. Albany is the capital of New York. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth. Each of these statements is true. Furthermore, each statement is verifiable and not debatable, provided that definitions are agreed upon. Put simply, evidence exists that could potentially prove or disprove each claim. Opinions, unlike facts, are neither true nor false. An opinion can express a belief, attitude, value, judgment, or feeling. Some examples include: dogs are the best mammals in existence. Albany is the most interesting city in New York. World War II was a terrible war. Each of these statements expresses an opinion. Note that each is debatable. In other words, one can potentially agree or disagree with. Debate, a statement of opinion. Note that the final statement, World War II was a terrible war, strikes many of us as factual. However, this is a statement of opinion. Yes, most people would consider World War II terrible. However, there is always the possibility that somebody out there holds a different opinion, as strange as they may seem. It is very rare for a statement with a value word like terrible to be factual. Now that we know the differences between a fact and an opinion, it's important to know how to distinguish between them when reading literature. Let's look at some helpful strategies. Watch for opinion masked as fact. A lot of times, professional or technical language can seem factual. In particular, you'll want to watch out for predictions. Predictions are opinions since they cannot be verified in the present. This is even true if the prediction is being expressed by an expert with an informed opinion. A zoologist who predicts that a particular animal will go extinct in 50 years, for example, is stating an informed opinion. This opinion is based on evidence, research, and expertise, but because it cannot be presently confirmed, it is not a fact. Value or judgment words often signal an opinion. LeBron James is very tall is a statement most people would agree with. However, the word very makes this problematic. What exactly does it mean to be very tall? It is not defined. What one person considers very tall, another may consider average or even short. The word very is an example of a value or judgment word. Here's a list of value and judgment words. If you see one of these in a statement, then the view being expressed is likely an opinion. Look for words like should or ought to. These words usually suggest a course of action or give advice. Though this advice may be advisable, it is rarely factual. No matter how much we agree with a should statement, it is by its very nature opinion. For instance, one should avoid smoking cigarettes may be sound advice with a lot of supporting evidence, but it is still an opinion. Smoking cigarettes can cause a variety of health ailments, on the other hand, can be verified and is therefore factual. In essence, facts can be verified by evidence, and opinions are statements of belief, attitude, value, judgment, or feeling. Before we go, let's look at a quick review question. Which of the following statements is factual? A. Ohio is a beautiful state. B. You should never drive faster than the speed limit. C. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Or D. George Washington was a great public speaker. The answer is C. This is the only option that can be backed up by evidence. Thanks for watching and happy studying.